Hello everybody, it's Casey here. So if you've been watching my channel for a while now, then you may remember that a few years back I did actually a pair of videos which was primarily inspired by the Nostalgia Critic, but in the years since I've also seen similar movie review channels that have also done this, and it's a subject that kind of interests me. It is movies that everybody disagrees with you on. That is being, what are the movies that you just completely despise, but everyone else and their mother loves them? And reversely, what are the movies that you like, but everyone else seems to hate? So if you've been keeping tabs on my channel for a while, then you may remember that I did two videos covering this very subject back to back. And what was kind of noteworthy about it was that was I believe to be the very first time that I had ever actually gotten live on camera to talk to you guys. Up until that point, there was either no narration in my videos at all, or if it was, then it's in similar vein to my other top 10s and other videos where it's just me and the microphone and I'm reading off a script that I've written and everything. So that was my first attempt at trying to get over my fear of public speaking and being on camera. And also, I had like a few notes with me, but for the most part I was speaking largely without a script or anything. I was just trying to speak more the way I would talk to my friends or just anybody on the street. I was trying to do it more off the cuff. And it could be argued how much of a success it was or not, although I can at least say that from that experience, I think I did get better at not being so nervous in front of camera, and probably as attested by all of different reaction videos that I've done now, that I think I've gotten better at just not freaking out whenever the camera's on me. Now that it's been a few years, recently I was looking through my top 10 playlist on my channel, and just as I was looking at it, those two videos, even just by the thumbnails you can tell that they really just more and more to me just started to really stick out like a sore thumb. Especially because I didn't have a lot of the tech that I do now, especially in regards to sound. I mean, even the microphone that I'm using here is just like a very cheap basic microphone, but even then I would like to think that my sound quality has still gotten way better than it did last time. I'm still using the same camera to record, but back then I didn't have any microphones or anything yet, so I was just relying on the camera's microphone, which, yeah, you can hear me, but the quality is just not great. And of course the lighting wasn't really all that great either. Even with all the lights in my room turned on, I was still getting glares, and it was very out of focus and stuff. And I'm sure at the time it was the best that I could do, but now that it's been a couple years, looking back on it, this was the one thing that I thought, you know what, I really want to go back and redo this, especially because, and maybe it's not noticeable to you guys, but it definitely is to me, but especially since that was the first time I was speaking off the cuff on camera, I was definitely nervous, and even with the editing I could do, I was really fumbling over my lines and stuff. And so normally I kind of just leave my old videos alone and just focus on trying to just make my next project even better than the last one. But this is the one time that I really felt that those two videos desperately needed a refresh on them. Especially because over the years, I think some of my choices have now changed. You'll notice in these new lists, there's definitely going to be a lot of repeaters on this, but I think there's definitely going to be some new entries in the list too, and the order's going to be a little different. And this time I have decided to work off of a script, and I was able to organize my thoughts a lot better. So for those of you who remember or are interested in watching those older videos, you'll definitely notice in this new one that I was just able to articulate my thoughts a lot better on a few of the subjects here, which we'll get into it as we go along here. But yeah, this is something that I normally don't do, but just the more I looked at it, I was like, yeah, this definitely needs a redo, not just to help better explain my thoughts on these movies, but also just to have better sound quality, better picture quality, and yeah, it was about time for a refresh. So just like before, what we're going to do is we're going to have a pair of videos where first I'm going to talk about the movies that I dislike that everybody else seems to love, and then hopefully soon you guys will get the vice versa video where we'll have the top 10 movies that I enjoy that everyone else just seems to crap on. And obviously remember that all of this, just like in any of my other videos, all of this is just opinion. If you like or dislike any of these movies, it doesn't say anything about you, like whether you're a smart or dumb or a good or bad person or anything, or if you have any taste or anything at all. Like, I just find this interesting, and just like the Nostalgia Critic said years ago, it all just comes down to how well can you explain yourself. And especially in the years since, looking at other people's videos on this subject, I've heard the strangest things that people like and don't like, and even movies that I think are masterpieces that people hate, they at least explain the more personal reasons of why they don't like it, and I'm fine with that. I just find that interesting. So be sure to leave comments in the videos here and let me know, like, what are the movies that you always seem to disagree with people? Are there ones that you just can't stand that everyone else just sings praises about? Or what are the ones that you think have, like, oh, why can nobody see the genius, and everyone else just hates it? And the other thing is that I'm not going to delete the old videos. I am still going to keep them up more for posterity's sake. I'll probably even link the original old videos in the description box for this new one. So if you are newer to this channel and you're interested in looking back at what my quality used to be like compared to now, then feel free. I think it is like a neat experiment to see just like how far along that you yourself can personally improve on your craft and everything. But I definitely think that in the future, any future new people that may ask me questions about this subject, about movies that I like or don't like, I'm probably going to, from now on, link them to these new videos that I'm making. But like I said, I'll still keep the old videos up. I'm not going to get rid of them. But yeah, it was high time for a makeover. So without further ado, this is the top 10 films that I dislike that everyone else seems to love. Remastered.
I don't know what they have to say, it makes no difference anyway, whatever it is, I'm against it. No matter what it is or who commenced it, I'm against it.
Number 10. Howl's Moving Castle. Starting off with a golden oldie from the original video, although as you're gonna notice in this countdown, the repeat offenders here are all in a different order. I bumped this one to the very back of the list this time around because it's the one I'd be the most up for watching again in comparison to the others. I mean, it's Studio Ghibli. Even the weakest of their filmography churns out amazing visuals and animation and memorable characters, and for me, this is one of their weaker entries. I'm sorry if I sound like a lazy ass here, but honestly, go watch Nostalgia Critic's Disney-cember review of this movie, as apparently he and I share literally the exact same opinion of this film. Every single problem he points out are my exact thoughts as well. But to try and summarize, what it mostly boils down to is a messy plot that I found mostly confusing rather than mysterious or charming. Things like character motivations, or why Sophie keeps morphing back and forth between her old and young forms, stuff like that. that. I'm not asking for everything to be spoon-fed to me, but at the same time, if you leave things too vague, then it makes it difficult to care about what's going on. Now, apparently this film was based off of a book by the same name, and admittedly I have yet to read it, but from what I've heard, this film leaves out a lot of stuff that's better explained in the novel, so maybe that's the real problem here. I'm watching a jigsaw puzzle with some vital pieces missing. But as many critics will tell you, if I have to read the original book to understand the movie adaptation, then the movie hasn't done its job. For the people out there who utterly adore this movie and maybe get more out of it because they read the book, good for you. More power to you. It just wasn't for me. Give me Totoro, Porco Rosso, and Kiki any day.
No matter what it is or who commenced it, I'm against it.
Number 9. Harry Potter. Another flashback to the old video, and this is the one I think I managed to explain myself the best on last time, so I'll try and be brief here. I'm specifically referring to the Sorcerer's Stone here, although this opinion could also extend to the franchise as a whole, and the book is based off of as well. For starters, my first genre love will always be science fiction, so traditional magic and sword and sorcery fantasy was never my main squeeze, even as a kid. Though when this series took the world by storm, I read the first book like everyone else was doing just to see what the hullabaloo was, and I don't remember being particularly impressed by it. It was fine enough, but even when I was younger, I didn't see what the big deal was. And it's been so long, I can't even remember why I went ahead with watching the movie. I know I saw it in theaters. I think it was actually my mom who was curious about it and wanted to see it, so we did. And that's pretty much where my interest in the series ended, although I would later see the second film because my friend brought it over for a sleepover. Really, all my problems with the world building in this magic school boil down to Dumbledore. How fitting that the word dumb is in his name, cause boy oh boy does he do some dumb stuff. Like knowingly leaving an orphan with his nasty abusive relatives. It's as if he knew what kind of story he was in and purposely tried to give the main character an even more tragic backstory. And let's not even get into how dangerous Hogwarts is to the students and faculty. I mean, yeah, it's a fantasy and magic can be inherently dangerous, so I'm not exactly expecting this medieval castle to follow OSHA regulations, but the fact that Dumbledore outright states that there's a deadly corridor everyone's forbidden from entering, and then carrying on like it's nothing set off so many alarm bells for me even as a kid. Even Cat Dickerous made a joke about this.
And of course he goes on a rant very similar to the book and film where he talks about how great Hogwarts is, but then immediately follows that up with a warning you'll die horribly if you go to a certain corridor on the 3rd floor. The perfect welcome for an 11-year-old boy mentally abused by his step-parents for his entire life living under the fucking stairs. My favourite part about this though is that after his speech, if you immediately talk to him again, he forgets everything he mentioned about the 3rd floor and tells you how great the place is to explore.
Huggy, Watty, Hogwarts. Oh, wonderful place to explore.
By the way, don't die!
What's weird is that I watch tons of shows and movies with kid protagonists getting into dangerous situations and rarely batted an eyelash, so why did this specifically stick in my craw so much? I think it's mostly due to the fact that the aforementioned kid heroes were 90% cartoons and as such follow a different set of rules and logic. But here, especially when it's live action, it hits a bit closer to reality. And on a final note, considering that Hermione is a muggle-born witch and felt the need to do tons of studying to be at the same respect level as naturally adept wizards, I always found her story to be way more interesting than Harry's, and as such, I think she should have been the main character. How much more interesting would it have been to have our protagonist come from a totally normal family, but then be accepted into a magic school and have to deal with a supernatural society that doesn't accept her, and watch her rise to the top, proving that book learning and natural talent have equal pros and cons, and aren't inherently better than the other. I would have watched the heck out of that series rather than doing the tired and cliche Chosen One routine. Well, in the end, in hindsight, considering just how toxic and problematic and downright cruel that J.K. Rowling has become in recent years, with many fans re-evaluating the not-so-great stuff in the series they didn't pick up on before, maybe it's good that I never latched onto this franchise to begin with. I think I dodged a bullet with this one.
No matter what it is or who commenced it, I'm against it.
Number 8. Captain America Civil War. Okay, this is the entry that actually gave me the motivation to want to do this redo video, as this is the one from the old version that I think I stumbled the most with. Note to self, always have at least a few notes written down somewhere even when you're speaking off the cuff. So now's the time to articulate myself more clearly. There's so much I want to break down that for this entry, I'm just going to put all my thoughts in a clear bullet list. Number 1, why is this billed as a Captain America movie? I know Bucky is largely at the crux of this, but for how many characters we got here, this is basically an Avengers movie. And while we're on the subject, while the airport fight scene is cool and arguably the best part of the whole movie, when you step back and think about it, there's only like 10 of them total there. In the comics, this registration disagreement caused a countless number of superheroes to turn against one another, you know, on the level of a war. But here, this is like a fight between friends breaking out in the back of an Applebee's parking lot. If they absolutely had to adapt this storyline, it should have been done much later after more characters were established. And speaking of new characters, Number 2, the most problematic introduction for Spider-Man. This also ties into the wonky character arc for Iron Man. After so many previous movies with tons of collateral damage, this one incident in Nigeria convinces Tony Stark to do a 180 and register with the government. This only makes him look like the biggest hypocrite ever, because this lady chews him out for the death of her son during the events of Age of Ultron, which is what finally convinces him to agree with the Sokovia Accords. And then he turns right around and recruits an inexperienced teenager, and yeah, he has superpowers, but that's besides the point, to join a fight said teenager has no business being in. Wow, Tony, just wow. Number 3, on the subject of Tony Stark, weird how he suddenly seems to take everything at face value. You'd think after the events of the first 2 Iron Man movies, he'd be apprehensive of anything to do with government authority. He also revealed his identity on TV back in the very first film that kicked all this off, and he's a genius billionaire with near unlimited resources, so of course it's easy for him to say, give up your identity and register. He doesn't have as much at risk as the other characters. Also, Tony knows full well that Bucky was brainwashed into killing his parents, but he refuses to see him for the victim Bucky actually is. Granted, yes, Tony's in a bad emotional place in that moment, but if anyone here actually acted like an adult and stepped away for 5 minutes to breathe, then maybe Tony wouldn't have lashed out at the wrong people to blame here. And quick side note, why is there a conveniently placed security camera on a seemingly random back road of New York and in the early 90s, no less? And number 4, speaking of hypocrites, why did no one point out how ass-backwards Thaddeus Ross was being? He claims the Avengers are a dangerous threat that needs to be controlled, never mind the fact that the government was about to nuke New York City in the first Avengers movie, and he's responsible for the creation of the Incredible Hulk and Abomination. As the Ava Max song goes, you should take your little finger and just point it in the mirror, because baby, maybe you're the problem. I also love how Ross has the gall to call Captain America a vigilante when Steve's been doing pretty much everything the government asked him to do since World War II. Hey Cap, we need you to take 6 men into the middle of nowhere in Europe and mess up the enemy's crap. Hey Cap, please help this random group of weirdos defeat actual space aliens by any means necessary. Hey Cap, go incapacitate everyone on this ship. And yeah, it's okay for you to jump out of the plane without a parachute. Hey Cap, we need you to stand aside while we scapegoat your best friend for a crime he didn't commit and execute him. Yeah, vigilante my foot. I could probably go on for ages, as there's so much more I could pick apart, but I think this is more than enough, and plenty of people on the internet have dissected it already, and with more finesse than I probably could. I know every movie has its flaws if you look at them with a magnifying glass, and many of the best ones have plot holes so small you don't think about them until long after. But if I'm already picking apart the illogic of the plot on the first viewing as it's happening, there's a problem. I always hate it when superheroes fight one another. A misunderstanding when they first meet is one thing, but not this, and not when it's handled in such a clunky way. It's like everyone was forced into acting slightly out of character just to force the plot to happen, because Civil War was such a huge event in the comics, so we gotta do it in the movies too, right? Just... I always hated this comic story, and the second they announced it as a movie, I knew I was in for a rough time. I just never thought it could be this rough.
No matter what it is or who commenced it, I'm against it.
Number 7. Avatar. Still harkening back to the old list, and I think I explained myself well enough last time, so I'll try and be brief here. I ranked it kind of midway this time because in the years since this came out, I think more people have kind of lost interest in it, so maybe I'm not totally alone in my criticisms anymore. And it's weird because for what was once the highest grossing movie ever made, everyone seems to not talk about it anymore. It made all this money and won all sorts of awards, and then just seemed to drop off the face of the planet. But I remember at the time, everyone around me was treating this like it was the greatest thing ever made, and I just couldn't figure out why. I mean, there's no denying that the landscapes are beautiful and the aliens have neat designs, and this was also around the time that motion capture tech was finally being perfected, so we didn't have wonky, uncanny valley stuff going on anymore. I can respect it for that. It's just, the story is something that's been done a jillion times. It's Pocahontas, it's Fern Gully, it's Dances with Wolves, but in space. Now that's not inherently a bad thing, there's nothing new under the sun and all that, and if the trailers had been more upfront in basically saying this is Dances with Wolves in space, I probably would have been more forgiving towards it. Heck, the trailers for Zathura outright stated from the world of Jumanji in their promos. They had no problems in saying we're making Jumanji in space, but here the promos and movie and subsequent early reviews kept acting like this was some mind-blowing new thing no one's ever seen before, and it's gonna become the next sci-fi fantasy epic, and geez, can you sound any more pompous than that? The ending's also more than a bit sloppy. The aliens managed to drive off the invading colonizers, and while this is a big victory for them, you guys realize the humans could easily come back, right? I don't know, it's just okay. It has its bright spots, I just don't get why the world lost their minds over it. And as of the time of this video, the sequel is finally coming out, so guess we'll see how well that one does.
No matter what it is or who commenced it, I'm against it.
Number 6. Titanic. On the subject of James Cameron movies, time to give this old entry a revisit. Again, it's a technical marvel. The acting's fine. I'm not arguing its importance as a milestone of cinema. It's just, I'm usually not a fan of pure romance stories. Stories can have romance in them alongside other stuff. I just get bored when the romance is all that the story is. The film's also way too long. Remember the good old days when you needed 2 VHS tapes to fully watch this? I think this story could have easily gotten to the point far quicker. Jack and Rose's romance is fine, though if they had to make the film so long, I think I would have liked it more if they had treated it more like the Poseidon Adventure and had a whole group of characters of different ages and from different walks of life that we could get to know, and how the tragedy affects them in different ways. And it would be more suspenseful as you'd be left wondering who's going to survive and who will die. Like the musicians who keep on playing no matter what to try and keep everyone calm. What's their story? Or that old couple that chooses to die together in bed rather than be separated. Honestly, that got more of a raw reaction out of me than any of the Jack and Rose stuff. And the more I've read up about the RMS Carpathia, the ship that saved the remaining survivors, the more I want a movie about that ship and crew rather than the tragedy everyone already knows about. Seriously, go do some digging into the Carpathia. The story of how the crew and passengers pushed themselves to the limit to save as many people as they could is beyond incredible, and I'd much rather watch a film about a group of unexpected heroes saving the lives of over 700 people than another Oscar-fishing over-dramatization of a mass tragedy. And if such a film already exists, can someone please point me to it, because I'd love to see it. If I want to watch a movie about a sinking ship with a band of survivors I actually give a crap about, give me the Poseidon Adventure any day. For me, Poseidon Adventure is my Titanic.
No matter what it is or who commenced it, I'm against it.
Number 5. Moana. Hey, finally a new entry on the list, and arguably the first one that I know I'm probably going to get ripped apart for in the comments. For the past 10 or so years now, it seems that Disney has been attempting to branch out from the typical fairy tale stories that have made their studio as famous as it is, and even when they fall back on the traditional story with a princess, they've started to make the heroines more fierce and independent with more modern sensibilities, like in The Princess and the Frog and Tangled, or mess with the stereotypical Disney formula like in Frozen. So when Moana was released, everyone I knew seemed to be in a joyous uproar, praising the movie up and down for its strong female hero, great songs, and good story that I seemed to throw the typical princess cliches out the window. So with all these great reviews, I eagerly dove in and wound up learning a lesson in how massive overhyping can taint a movie for someone. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate this movie, but I just thought it was okay. Just okay. The animation is gorgeous, and while the main cast isn't very huge, they all have depth to them and aren't just cardboard stereotypes, and it's also refreshing to have a movie where there isn't any romance to be found. Moana doesn't need a boyfriend, and neither is she looking for one, and she even makes it a point to continuously tell Maui that she's not a princess. Along with her parents not dying and her not being a damsel in distress, it's almost as if the movie itself were saying to the audience, we know what our typical tropes are, we know you know what the tropes are, and we're not going to fall into them here. Though after a while it seems like the movie wants to drill this into the heads of the audience. And yet, even with all this great stuff going for it, by movie's end, I for some reason still seem semi-underwhelmed. For one thing, while all the songs are sung beautifully, save for How Far I'll Go, I honestly can't remember any of the other songs. I remember where a song was in the movie, but unlike Tangled and Frozen, which had catchy music that I was still humming after the credits were rolling, here it all just kind of blended together in my head. Then there's the Island of Monsters they have to go to get Maui's magical hook back. Other than tricking Tamota, the giant coconut crab, all the other creatures that were hinted at earlier are only encountered or seen for just a few seconds. An extended battle or journey through this fantastical place, I think, would have been much more enjoyable than just watching two people argue and sail on a boat for a large chunk of the movie. Which leads to Maui himself. Considering how everyone else seems to talk about how funny he supposedly was, I really wanted to like him, but I just don't. He's incredibly self-centered, snarky, and full of himself, which can sometimes be funny, but here to me it's just super frustrating. He makes fun of Moana constantly, tries to ditch her at the first opportunity more than a few times, and had he been just a bit meaner, I'd almost consider him to be the villain, taking into account the fact that it's his careless actions that cause all the problems of the plot and nearly destroy the world. True, he learns his lesson and comes to Moana's aid in the end, but his heel-face turn is rather abrupt, giving next to no explanation as to why he changes his mind and comes back to help. But at the very least, his character arc teaches the age-old lesson of taking responsibility for your mistakes, though in the end, it's still up to Moana to fix his mistake. Also, on a final side note, why is the pig on all the promotional material when the chicken is the real animal companion? Also, why did the grandma's ghost physically show up? Just seeing the manta ray or stingray, whichever it was enough to know it was her. Maybe it would have been better if Moana saw a manta ray in the water and got inspired to try again, and it would be left up to interpretation of whether it was actually her grandma visiting her or if Moana was just inspired. But nope, apparently ambiguity is too much for the youngins to understand, and Ghost Grandma has to physically appear and spoon-feed us the lesson. In the end, I'm left very divided. This isn't a bad movie by any means. It's very beautiful, has nice songs, good lessons, and a great main character, and it's great that Disney gave us a story that focused entirely on Polynesian myths and culture, something that's almost never talked about. However, the few problems and nitpicks I found with it left me with a feeling that just had me shrugging my shoulders and saying, it's okay, which isn't helped by the fact that everyone else I know seemed to be treating this like the greatest thing ever made. And hang on to that thought, because we'll be revisiting this phenomena in a later entry.
No matter what it is or who commenced it, I'm against it.
Number 4. 2001: A Space Odyssey. Okay, I promise this and the next entry are the last two golden oldies from the previous video, so I'll try and be brief here. Again, not denying that this is a very important film, both in terms of special effects and its scope, especially for the late 1960s, and considering this was made before the moon landing makes it even more incredible in terms of its scientific accuracy of what real space travel is and probably will be like. It's a classic case of a film I respect more than I like, and most of that dislike boils down to not just the way too long runtime, but also all the alien stuff and how so much of it is left up to interpretation. Either that or the point it's trying to make is clear and I'm just dumb. Could be a mix of both. You don't want to know how many videos I've watched from so many different people trying to break down the themes and the meaning of stuff in this, especially that what the F ending. As such, I think I understand it just a little better now, but there's still things I can't wrap my head around, and it just leaves me more frustrated rather than curious. Then again, if a film can invite so many questions and leaves you wondering about it for years, I guess it did something right. The one thing that's the best part for me is the middle section with HAL 9000, probably because it's the stuff I understand the clearest. That would have made a great movie by itself, like a feature-length version of the Ultimate Computer episode of the original Star Trek, where the government tries to replace as much stuff as they can with automation, and the crew having to fight back against this computer taking logic to a deadly level, showing that no matter how far technology goes, that human element must always play a factor, or we ourselves become the unfeeling machines. That would have made a thoughtful and epic enough film on its own without having to include prehistoric man and mysterious alien monoliths, all while everything goes at the pace of a snail stuck in the mud. Normally I can handle slow burns, but not this slow. If you're able to decipher this mystery wrapped in an enigma, you're a way smarter person than I am. And anyone who has yet to see this, I do recommend watching it at least once, as it is a technical masterpiece. Just be prepared to have your finger on that fast forward button.
No matter what it is or who commenced it, I'm against it.
Number 3. Amadeus. Oh boy, this movie. We've now come to the one entry on the list that I actually do seriously hate with a passion. If you saw the original video, then you'll remember that this made it to my number 1 spot, but now it's just at number 3, and if you remember how much I raged and vented over this last time, you're probably curious what the other 2 entries are. We'll get there in a sec. Honestly, I'd say just go back and watch the original, as the raw emotion that came out of me in that old video surprised even myself, so I'll try and dial it back this time around for all your sakes. Very long story short, my biggest issue isn't even really with the film itself. On its own, it's just okay. It's the kind of film I wouldn't really watch for entertainment so much as just for educational value. It's interesting, though Mozart himself can get so incredibly annoying real fast, and that stupid giggle laugh of his is like nails on a chalkboard for me. But what made me despise this movie so much is that, well, I have no clue why all the teachers and staff at my school were so obsessed with this film, but from 7th grade all the way up to my senior year of high school, for some reason the stars aligned in such a way that every single year, whether it was a music, art, or history class, I would wind up being forced to watch this movie again and again. The first 2 times I was indifferent to it, then every time after I got more annoyed, and finally the kicker came when the film was being shown in 2 of my classes at the same time. So I'd watch a 20-minute section in one class, and then 2 periods later have to watch that same section again in another class. Finally, by senior year, when the movie cropped up yet again, it's the closest I ever got to yelling at a teacher when I outright refused to be subjected to this film yet again, to which I grabbed all my stuff, stormed out of class, and went to the library for the rest of the week to avoid it, and just turned in an essay about Mozart instead. Sorry if that kinda sounds like a stupid reason for hating on a movie so much, but hey, if you were forced to watch the same thing over and over again, no matter how objectively good it is, you'd probably get sick of it too. If you like this film, awesome. Just keep it far away from me.
No matter what it is or who commenced it, I'm against it.
Number 2. Young Frankenstein. And here now we finally made it to the other two new entries on this updated list, and for as much as I ranted about Amadeus, these final two numbers beat it out, mostly because these were the two entries that I thought everyone would beat me up the most for, but I'm not gonna lie about my true feelings, so here we go. Mark this down under famous movie that for whatever reason I never saw. Okay, to be more specific, I actually had seen plenty of clips of this film before, but had never watched the entire thing the whole way through. It's often billed as one of the greatest comedies ever made, with a countless number of film critics and fans constantly quoting lines and touting this as one of the funniest movies they've ever seen, and the high point of director Mel Brooks' career. So at long last, I sat down to finally give this infamous comedy a watch, and I'm left scratching my head as to why everyone raves over this. Oh sure, it's got plenty of funny moments, but well, before any fans of this film call me out for blasphemy at even suggesting that I didn't like it, let me be very clear. I didn't love this movie, but I didn't hate it either. I did enjoy it, just not as much as I thought I would. To get the good out of the way first, on a pure technical level, the production values are utterly fantastic. You'd never guess this was made in the 1970s, as the filmmakers made the bold choice to shoot the whole thing in black and white, and style it after the classic Universal horror movies of the 30s and 40s, right down to using the same laboratory props from James Whale's Frankenstein. The entire plot is basically an abridged version of the first three Universal Frankenstein films, and the crew did an amazing job of recreating the infamous moments from said movie, sometimes shot for shot. And the actors all do a fine job in their roles, especially Gene Wilder, who brings his maniac energy to the Mad Doctor, who just wants to restore honor to the Frankenstein family by reforming the creature. However, I think a lot of the passion the filmmakers had for the classic horror movies they're parodying is part of the problem. There were more than a few moments that came off as tense, emotional, or dramatic, or were just a straight-up recreation of a famous scene, and instead of laughing, I found myself fully engaged as though I were watching something totally serious. It's as though the cast and crew got too wrapped up in recreating gothic horror, and periodically someone had to tap them on the shoulder and remind them they were supposed to be making a comedy. I mean, it's got plenty of chuckle-worthy moments. The bit with the revolving bookcase was a howl, the entire sequence with the blind man is gold, and Igor is hands down the funniest character of the whole movie, with the most consistent one-liners and hilarious expressions. But everything else is just okay. Even my parents, who watched along with me, later admitted that wasn't as funny as I remember it being. Frederick makes the leap between wanting nothing to do with his grandfather's work and feverishly building a monster in no time flat. There's a few jokes that seem like they take a huge leap in logic to make them work, and the three women serve virtually no purpose or hardly do anything. Inga's there just to be eye candy and make boob and sex jokes, and before anyone calls me a prude, I don't mind sexy jokes, just not when that's all her character is. Frederick's fiancée Elizabeth disappears not long into the plot, and only reappears again in the last 15 minutes just so we can have a Bride of Frankenstein reference. Seriously, she was gone for so long, I honestly forgot about her until she suddenly popped up again. And Frau Blucher, the spooky housekeeper, is basically there just to let the creature loose at a critical moment, and then she too drops off the radar and is virtually forgotten about. I thought she'd be paired up with Igor in the end, since he was the only one left without a girlfriend, but nope. And as for the creature, considering he's basically a mentally handicapped person stumbling around with little guidance, anytime he was attacked or got hurt, it just made me feel sorry for him, like in the actual serious adaptations, rather than laughing at him. I'm sure this film was a laugh riot at the time, but it's safe to say my family's taste in humor have changed. Much like what happened when I saw Moana, I think the real problem is that so many people have gushed about how much this movie is a classic and how rip-roaring hilarious it is, and I think I got too hyped up for it. So when I finally saw it, I was like, that's it? Make no mistake, from an objective standpoint, it's a very well put together film with great production value, but as they say, comedy is subjective, and this just didn't quite do it for me. I personally had a much more fun time with the Monster Squad. This movie does deserve to be considered a classic. Just remember to exercise caution at setting your standards too high.
No matter what it is or who commenced it, I'm against it.
And And the #1 movie I don't like that everyone else loves is A Christmas Story. Well, I guess if you hear in the news tomorrow that random internet YouTuber got killed by angry mob for daring to speak out against them, then you'll know who they're referring to. Along with sprucing up the Civil War section, this was the other big reason why I wanted to give this old countdown a do-over, as I remember not long after I posted the original video, I slapped my forehead and said out loud, "I can't believe I forgot A Christmas Story." Well, it's time to finally rectify that. Yes, folks, the Christmas classic that everyone and their mother gushes over and constantly quotes with those god-awful leg lamps that crop up in the stores every holiday season, and I just can't stand it. Part of me, much like Amadeus, is just overexposure, with some channels even hosting 24-hour marathons of this film. Seriously, why? But the other big part of it is just because I don't really find myself relating to it very much. Granted, the film is a flashback to the kid's childhood in the 40s, but there's plenty of old media and period pieces I greatly enjoy and can still say, oh yeah, I know that feeling, I've been through that too. So the time period isn't the problem, and yeah, not every single story has to relate to me personally for me to understand or connect with it, though obviously that helps if it does. But anytime I try to watch this or get into it, I just get so bored. I was never one of those kids that screamed and ran around the house when I got a present. Actually, according to my parents, I never really asked for anything specific. I always just kind of went with whatever ended up under the tree, with my folks just getting stuff related to whatever I was into that year. So Ralphie's obsession with this stupid BB gun just got annoying. And boy, does this film show how much the times have changed. You're lucky to find anything even remotely shaped or colored like a real gun in a toy store nowadays. I never knew anyone dumb enough to freeze their tongue to a pole. No one ever washed my mouth out with soap if I swore, and I don't know of anyone's parents who ever did this. The leg lamp is... well, the leg lamp. I'm an only child, so the sibling dynamic either annoyed me or just didn't click with me at all. The bullies just remind me of the bullies I had to deal with constantly, and it's a section of my life I don't want to be reminded of. And when the Bumpus' dogs ruined their Christmas dinner, I was never laughing at this. I just felt sorry for the Parkers. But most of all, has anyone ever encountered such a jerk of a mall Santa before? I mean, yeah, I know the frustrations of working retail, but the scene at the department store just always seemed especially cruel and unfunny to me. And why are all the kids screaming and crying when they get sent down the slide? That thing's freaking awesome. Even after I stopped believing in Santa, I still would have sat down and talked to him if it meant I got to rocket myself down a giant mega fun slide afterward. What's wrong with these kids? Now, obviously, this whole story is being told from the point of view of one guy who is reflecting on his past, so much of it is probably being exaggerated, and I get the whole theme of how we look back on our childhoods and how many things seemed super big and important back then but are just stupid now, and how some things are bad in the moment but later we can look back and laugh. I get what it's trying to say. It's just, rather than being funny, this entire thing is either frustrating, awkward, uncomfortable, cringe-inducing, annoying, or boring to me. If this movie connects with you, that's great. It's just not for me, and we obviously have very different tastes in what we think is funny. Well, that about wraps it up. It honestly felt pretty good to go back and improve on an old video that badly needed a makeover. Hopefully I didn't make any arch enemies here, and to remind you, this is all just my own opinion. If you like any of these films, that's awesome. They're just not my cup of tea. And soon I'll be posting my do-over of the top 10 films I like that everyone hates, so look forward to that. Be sure to subscribe for more similar content, and I'll see you all next time.